Well, it's a real pleasure to be back with you again this week. And this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about the next section of Judges that we are studying. And in this case, it's Judges 13 through 16, focusing on the story of Samson. Now, in what is to follow, I'm going to talk about three different topics. One topic is, how does the story of Samson fit into the larger editorial framing of the book of Judges? And I think that the nature of the Samson story really helps us understand something about what the editors of Judges were working with and what they're trying to do with it. The second thing we'll talk about has to do with the literary features in the story, some of the characterization, some of the storytelling techniques, and just I want to unpack a little bit of the narrative itself to talk about why it is such a provocative and exciting narrative. And then thirdly, I want to get into our question of character ethics that we've been discussing. What kinds of ethics grow from this story? Were we supposed to follow this story? And specifically, I'm interested in how this story gets used with children. So let's jump right into it. Now, at the very beginning of the book, we have this, of chapter 13, we have this little refrain that shows up over and over again where it says, the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines. And then we have the rise of this guy who's going to be a hero. This pattern we've seen before of Israel. When they have good leadership, everything is going well, and then once the good leadership is gone, then things go badly, and then after a while, the people then get a new leader that God sends them, and things get better. And this kind of up and down pattern, we've seen it over and over again in the book, even so far. Well, the fact is that these individual stories are not part of the same original literary tradition. In other words, they were not written necessarily even with knowledge of each other. If you've probably noticed, they're not very integrated. They're not connected. So you can read the Deborah story, you can read the Micah story, you can read the Ehud story or the Samson story, and they're very much just little separate short stories in this larger anthology. And so what's happened is, as I've said, is the editor has taken these various traditions and has woven them together, and then using this editorial framework to say that, okay, these stories are about good leadership. Israel needs good, strong leadership, and without that, then they have two problems. One is they fall into their own sinful ways, and then that leads them to fall into the hands of their oppressors, the Canaanites, or in this case, the Philistines. Well, that pattern continues here in Samson. However, the story doesn't fit very naturally within that framework if you think about it, right? Does Samson seem like the kind of guy you would want to be the judge? Does he seem like the kind of guy you would like to be the leader or the magistrate, the administrator? He's not doing leadership. He's not doing anything for the community. He's very self-centered, self-focused, and all the story is about stuff that happens to him and his reactions to those things. It's his story. And so really, the fact is that the Samson story is unusual in that it doesn't really fit itself into this larger framework, which raises the question of, well, why is it in here if it doesn't really do the work that the editor is trying to do? And the answer is, it's a really great story. It's a rousing story. It's exciting. It's the kind of story that you would encounter if you went to the movies or if you watched Game of Thrones on HBO, right? It's a very grown-up, very adult story, and it's exciting. It's sex, violence, vengeance, war, intrigue, betrayals, right? You've got this larger-than-life hero doing all these amazing adventures and exploits, who has a fundamental flaw in his character that leads to his downfall, and then at the very end he is able to muster one last bit of strength to achieve a great victory even as he is dying, and then he is buried in honor. Right? That's a fantastic, epic story. And it's meant to be exciting. It's meant to be enjoyable. It's meant to really evoke emotions in the reader. And I hope that you had that experience reading it. Also, of course, in the context of Israel, it's telling about Israel's conflict with the Philistines, and there's a kind of, sort of enjoyment in the story, I think, of all the ways in which Samson is getting the better of the Philistines. So you can imagine the Israelites really enjoying this kind of story, kind of like how, as a child, you might encounter stories of the cowboys and Indians, or, read stories about American exploits in wars against enemies, and we sort of enjoy watching movies in which, the bad guys that we fought against are losing, right? And so the fact that we will enjoy those kinds of stories should help us understand why this might be interesting to the Israelites. So that first point then is about the editorial stuff. I just want you to see the difference between what's happening at the high level in the way the book is put together, and then what's actually happening in the course of the story. And you have to kind of separate those two out a little bit, I think. Now, let's talk about the narrative, just a few little narrative elements as we go. First of all, we find out that there is this woman who is barren, who can't have any children. This is a very common theme in the Bible, biblical narrative. And she gets visited by the angel of the Lord, who tells her she's going to have a baby. This happens a lot in the Bible. In this case, the angel tells her two things. One is that Samson is going to deliver the people from the Philistines. Now, I actually question whether that happens, but the story says that he's going to deliver them from the Philistines, and that he's going to be a Nazirite. Now, that's kind of a fancy word. Nazirite is a term that we encounter also in Numbers chapter 6, in which the law says that somebody can take a Nazirite vow. And the Nazirite vow is taken for a limited period of time. A person chooses to go into it, and they refrain from cutting their hair, from drinking any wine, and they keep themselves ritually pure to an extreme degree as part of their vow to God. So that's the Nazirite vow in chapter 6 of Numbers. Samson's Nazirite situation is a little different. He's not choosing it. It's not for a limited time period. It's given to him. It's for his whole life, it says. Also, he doesn't really keep it. Now, the hair cutting is the central part of the story, but he certainly doesn't keep himself away from dead bodies, which he's supposed to do. And there's no evidence really that he's given up wine. I mean, they don't think it mentions him drinking wine, but can you imagine a Samson who's like, no, I don't want any wine? I can imagine he probably would enjoy, drinking to excess. That's the kind of character that he is in the story. Now, I don't know. That's my speculation. So he's a Nazirite, which in this case is not really connected to that other priestly ritual definition, but is more a kind of term that's for his separate, set-apart status and tied specifically to his hair, which becomes the central kind of narrative device. So when the angel appears, this is one of those stories where the angel appears and it's an angel talking, but actually it's God communicating. He appears to the woman, who then tells her husband, and it's amazing actually, her husband believes her. Yeah, okay, great. And then he prays for his own visitation. When the angel comes, the angel gives him the same message, actually minus the Philistines. He doesn't give the husband Manoah any extra information, which is pretty interesting. So it's a kind of affirmation of the mother character and her ability to receive revelation from God in this story. So it begins with the miraculous, you could say, special, set-apart birth of the baby, which is a theme that we see for a lot of these heroic and very important characters in the Bible, including Moses, right? Isaac, you get these kinds of stories are very common. So next, in chapter 14 through 16 then, the stories of Samson are organized around three women, or that's how I think of them. The second one is much shorter, but you have these three women who are all Philistine women, and they are women that Samson gets involved with, probably against the better judgment of his parents, against the better judgment of a rational actor in the situation. But Samson, say what you want about Samson, he's a man who knows what he wants. And he's a man who's going to get what he wants. And so here in chapter 14 it says that he says, I saw this woman and I want to have her as my wife. Now, there's a lot of problems here. This is a patriarchal context where marriage is fundamentally a business transaction between fathers. You know, so this is reflecting that kind of idea. It doesn't really, in this case, matter what the woman wants, but the father says, no, we're going to find somebody from your own kin, from your own people to marry. But Samson is very assertive and says, no, this is the woman I'm going to marry. Now, normally the father has absolute say in this, and so it's kind of unusual, but certainly fits with the rest of the story that Samson is, you know, he knows what he wants and he's going to get it, even against the social conventions of marriage of his day. So when he goes then, and he is on his way to meet his woman that he's going to marry, he meets the lion who attacks him, and then he kills the lion with his bare hands. It says he rips the lion apart and just leaves it there on the side of the road. And later, when he comes back, he sees the lion again. And bees have built a hive and have made honey inside the carcass of the lion. Now, when I was a kid, I used to be really grossed out by that idea. What? Well, it occurs to me that in the desert, probably the carcass was drying out, so it wouldn't be like putrefied. It would probably be just like a leather thing, or like maybe just bones, you know, like it's just a little thing, and the bees have built their thing in there, and there's honey, and he's eating the honey. He gives the honey to his parents, doesn't tell them where the honey came from. Well, then when he goes to the wedding, you see now we have the riddle. This is a very famous part, and is part of the narrative storytelling of the story, where he says, all right, I'm going to ask a riddle, and if you can explain the riddle, then I'm going to give you 30 linen garments and 30 festal garments. So linen garments would be like your everyday clothes, and festal garments would be like your Sunday best, you know, your suit and tie, your best dress, you know, something people would only have one of those. And they take him up on his bet. I think maybe ill-advisedly, they take him up on his bet. But then the riddle is a reference to the lion. He says, out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet. Well, kind of like the riddle that Bilbo tells Gollum under the mountain in The Hobbit, it's not really a riddle. I don't think it's totally fair, the riddle. But that's the riddle. They don't know it. They can't figure it out. And then they come to the woman and they say, if you don't get him to tell you what the riddle means, we're going to kill you and your father's whole family. And so she nags him for a week. And he finally tells her the meaning of the riddle. They come to him. They give him the meaning. And then that really angers him. So instead of keeping his end of the bet, he goes to Ashkelon, which is quite a ways away, kills a bunch of guys, takes their clothes, and then gives those clothes as the payment of his vow. Now, already, we've learned a lot about Samson's character, his superhuman strength, his bravery. He's a man of action, right? He sees the lion, he takes care of it, right? But he's also a man who enjoys messing with people. He enjoys provoking people. He enjoys being the center of everything, and he's very impulsive, and then that has sometimes cascading effects that are very violent, including here we've got the death of a large number of Phoenicians in Ashkelon. That's, you know, didn't have to happen. That was not necessary for him to do that. So then he just goes home. He's like, I ain't doing that. Well, after a while, he goes back and he says, all right, I'm here to see my wife. And they're like, wait, you're not going to see your wife. You left. We gave her to somebody else. So then he gets mad that they have given his wife to somebody else, that he thinks is his wife, even though he left her. And this is when he takes the foxes and he ties their tails together and puts torches on each pair of foxtails, and then they run throughout the fields and throughout the orchards and the vineyards, and they destroy all of the food belonging to this Philistine town. Now, did he have to do that? No, he didn't have to do that. Should he have done that? No, he should not have done that. Now, this was a very common war measure to burn crops in the ancient world and in the modern world. And so you see this is a very clear act of provocation on Samson's part, and it basically ends up starting a kind of war between the Judeans and the Philistines. He goes and hides. The Philistines come to the Judean people and say, you need to give us Samson, he needs justice. And then at that point, Samson does his other famous thing where he takes the jawbone of the donkey and he kills 1,000 of the Philistines. Did he need to do that? No. Should he have done that? No. They were there to apprehend him for essentially war crimes, and he didn't want to be apprehended. And so what's he doing? The word that we use with our children in much, let's say, less serious circumstances is escalating, right? We talk to our kids about breaking the chain. Somebody does something to you, you have a choice. You can either escalate or break the chain. Stop the cycle of retribution here or escalate. And every time Samson has a choice, he escalates. And here he is escalating to a very high degree. And basically he's waging this one-man war against the Philistines very effectively, but very violently. Now in chapter 16, in the next sort of phase of the story, we have the two other women. So the first woman was his Philistine wife that gave rise to these very famous scenes involving the honey from the lion and the foxes with the torches on their tails and the slaying 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass, right? That's the old King James version. And here we have the second woman who is a prostitute. So in the Bible generally it's not okay for a woman to be a prostitute, but it seems to be pretty common in the Old Testament for men to go to prostitutes. And so that's just part of that double standard having to do with the patriarchal context. That's just one of those things in the story that we just sort of note and go, okay, that was a different culture than ours. So he goes to the prostitute, and when he's there, the people in the town in Gaza, which is in the Philistine territory, like that is a major Philistine city. He's not at home. He is in the Philistine city visiting a Philistine prostitute. And when the people are waiting for him to come out in the morning, he gives them the slip by leaving at midnight, and on his way out pulls the city gates out of the ground, posts, doors, locking mechanism and all, and carries them possibly as far as Hebron, which is like 40 miles away. Now, is it the hill on the Hebron side of town, or does he actually carry it to Hebron? That's sort of unclear. But lifting these gates out of the ground themselves and carrying them away. Gaza was a big city. This was big, fortified, magisterial gates. These are not like a garden fence situation, right? So again, just impetuous, not necessary, provocative, but he is triumphing over the Philistines who are trying to trap him. Now, take a breath. I will too. This brings us to the third woman, who's the most famous of Samson's three Philistine women, and this is Delilah. Now, Delilah has gone down in history as the temptress, as beautiful seductress, as the foreign woman who is leading the good boy astray, right? Delilah, this is an iconic character from the Bible. There are several of these kind of women in the Bible that become symbols for sexual seduction that lead men on the wrong path. The other sort of most famous example would be Jezebel, the wife of Ahab. And, you know, even the word Jezebel has become, you know, a generic noun in certain kinds of discourse. So the Philistines come to Delilah and they say, if you'll get him to... we want you to get him to tell you the secret of his strength so that we can beat him. Now this is the same pattern that we see with the first wife. I guess the wife, right? I don't know, he's not married to Delilah. So they come to the woman and ask for help finding out a secret. She nags, and then eventually Samson tells her the truth, and then the Philistines end up using that to get the better of Samson, at least temporarily. So it's the same pattern in both of these stories. I don't think that's accidental. I think the stories are meant to mirror each other. The difference is important, though, which is that the first woman is threatened with violence against herself and her father. Delilah, she doesn't need any threat of violence. She is given the carrot, not the stick, 1,100 pieces of silver. So their motivations are different, but the basic situation is the same. Now, you have these then 3 times in which Samson tells her the wrong answer. Cords and ropes and hair being woven, and none of them work. And I always wondered, why doesn't he figure out what she's doing? Why not? And I think, I don't know, there's several options. One is he does know what she's doing, and he's very overconfident, and he feels like, I can toy with her, this is a big game we're playing, and even if I do tell her, she's not going to be able to cut my hair. Like, a man that strong and that powerful, how can this woman cut his hair? Even if that is the secret, it's not going to help her. That would be one explanation, is he's overconfident. Another one would be that he just doesn't realize, right? And he's toying with her, maybe he's playing with her. I don't think the Philistines rush in on him in those first 3. It's sort of unclear, but I don't think so. I think they're hiding. And then when he breaks the bonds, then I don't think they run in at that point, because it doesn't say he killed any of them. And it might be that in the end, when he finally told her, it was just out of exasperation. The text says that he was vexed to death, right? He was just couldn't take it anymore. All the nagging, he couldn't take it. And this vexation that she was giving him. So, he just kind of blurted it out, So, I don't know. Or was she so alluring? Was his desire for her so great that in the end, when she got petulant with him, he just wanted to make her happy, and so he told her the truth? That's a little too sincere, I think, for the picture of Samson as I see him. So I don't think it's that he really wanted her to love him. And I don't know that it's one of those first 2. Either he's overconfident or just like totally clueless. The bottom line is, she is able to cut his hair. How? Well, she made him fall asleep in her lap. I think this is, I think the word is post-coital sleep, right? So she has satisfied Samson, and now he is asleep there with her, reclining. And while he is in that deep sleep, then she whispers for the barber to come in and cut off his hair. And then he's trapped, he's caught, he's bound, his eyes are gouged out, and he's taken into slavery. And this is rapid, just extreme reversal of fortunes for our hero. But in the end, he is able to muster one last bit of strength and pray to God and push those pillars apart. And it says that when the building fell, he killed more people in his death than he had killed in his life, which was somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 or 1,200 people. So, conservatively. So, in the many hundreds of people. Well, so it's an exciting story. The characterization is so just rich, right? It's wonderful. But what do we do with it? Now, moving to our third part about character ethics. What do we do with it? The fact is, I don't think we generally have done anything with it. We've identified Delilah as a kind of a stereotype character to stay away from. That's probably not very helpful. Far as I can tell, Samson is pictured as this larger-than-life, strong figure. He shows up in some artwork. But the most common depictions of Samson, I think, for American Christians, is in children's contexts. So I still remember the picture of him with his chains on, breaking down the building. It was a picture on a leaf of my children's Bible I had when I was in 4th grade. And you've seen those images, whether it's in children's Bibles or Sunday school coloring pages or, videos to show preschoolers. Like the story of Samson kind of triumphing, praying to God, and then receiving from God strength to overcome his adversities and to overcome his enemies, right? That's a kind of a very good, feel-good story, a glorious story. And children love the idea of this really strong man just doing this amazing feat of strength. And in fact, when we went to the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C., which I'll be glad to give you a fuller report on that one of these days. It's very complicated. But they have a children's area, and one of the little exhibits is a little building with columns, and when you go there, your child can stand in the little place and push these little pillars that are designed to move and be pushed apart and pretend to be Samson. Now, in light of what we've done in the first part of this video, would you say that that seems like a great thing for children? Be like Samson. No, we don't want our children to be like Samson. He's petulant, he is impulsive, he's vulgar, he is greedy, he's escalating, he's violent, right? I mean, he's fun to observe, whether reading about him or like watching maybe a movie or something, but he's not the kind of character that we want to emulate. So in that sense, then, this story is one of those character ethics kind of stories that instead of telling us what to do or telling us who to be, is giving us a chance to reflect on who we want to be. So I think that if you wanted to have a conversation about Samson, instead of saying, well, what does this Bible story teach us? We should say, let's talk about escalation in war. Let's talk about sin and retribution, or maybe wrong revenge. Somebody does something to me and I do something even worse to you. And where does that lead? And how does that lead to really unnecessary suffering in the Samson story? So we can celebrate him as a kind of literary hero without celebrating any of his decision making or celebrating any of his virtues, such as they are. Now, certainly there's a moment in which he's praying to God, and it says that the Spirit of God is what is giving him the strength. It's the Spirit of God that leaves him when his hair is cut. So there is God in this story, and so I do think there is a conversation about, okay, if you have the strength of God, if the Spirit of God has endowed you with strength, is it physical strength? Is it moral strength? Is it intellectual strength? Is it faith strength? What are you going to do with it? What did God call a man like this to do and to be? Now it says that God wanted him to give a black eye to the Philistines. It says that God was looking for a pretext to inflict the Philistines. And that's the editor, I think, trying to find some constructive meaning in the story. We don't have to go that direction. I think we can ask ourselves, if you're a person to whom God has endowed gifts, strength, power, opportunity, what should you use it for? Do we use our strength and our power and our opportunity and our leadership to build community or to divide communities? To repair breaches or to escalate war? So the story then helps us think about the implications and the consequences of violent behavior or selfish behavior or behavior rooted in retribution or in either a sense of wrong or a sense of impetuous, I'll do what I want. So I think that to me is where the story is leading us to reflect on. And that's the question that I'd like for you to think about. How do you use your strength? And if you had, in the ways in which you are strong, if you had the strength of Samson, what would God have you do with it? Thank you so much. We'll be finishing up Judges next week, starting in chapter 17. And I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you virtually in just a few days. Thank you.